Alrighty. Let's see who's coming in to join us already. I love to see that people come right in. So please excuse me this. Oh, maybe not. That takes a minute. I guess nobody cares about stopping. Unless the live can work. There we go. Hello. Who has joined so far? Alrighty, getting everybody to join in. Hello, everybody, and welcome. So please excuse my voice. Got some bronchitis trying to deal with. I also decided to try and use my other laptop. Hopefully this comes out clearer. If you can, I'm assuming you guys can hear me. If you can, just say hello. Hey, Tim, what's up, buddy? Awesome. Good to hear. All right, cool. So as you can even know, tonight's, I don't know why it only says one person's in here yet. I got 3 people in here. That's funny. Awesome, cool. Awesome. Good to hear. Video and I guess I'll just start using this laptop. What's funny is my other laptop is newer. So let's start the topic. Does anybody have currently here have upgraded brake pads? And if so, what type of material choice did you use? Even if you have the stock, went with ceramic. So if you don't mind me asking, was the brand of ceramic that you have, was that supposed to be for reduction in dust? Or did you go for something that was supposed to be more aggressive as far as stopping capability? And just so people know, the whole concept behind ceramic is minimal brake dust and long life. However, ceramic isn't the strongest material as far as being able to stop in a shorter distance. But ceramic does give good brake rotor life because ceramic is a less aggressive material and it bites into the rotor less and it's quiet. So due to the fact you don't have that biting in, you don't get the friction. Yeah, the stock pads are good, but basically with a different ceramic material, usually the less dust usually means less stopping capability because you don't have that bite. No, shouldn't, but I'm looking for better front pads. I'm tired of cleaning my rims every day. So, Tim, if you're tired of cleaning them every day, you're going to have to look for a pad that is not a brake upgrade in the sense of stopping distance. Whenever you go for a pad that has a shorter stopping distance, the greater the dust is going to be. That's just the way it goes. So I would go for an aftermarket pad that the whole sole purpose is stock-like characteristics. I'm on stock pads, but to reduce the dust while maintaining similar performance of stock, do you have a recommendation? So that's difficult because as far as brake pads and brake dust, I never go for brake dust. I always go for more bite. So that's literally the opposite. Now I have experience in understanding the materials, but I don't have a lot of experience with different brands. I believe Hawk makes a standard like pad that people seem to like as far as low brake dust. There is, oh shoot, forgive me for some of the name brands because I use more of a race pad. I use a WinMax, WinMax W3. It is a pad that is for like short track, not short tracks, but also say shorter races, like 10 lap races. It's kind of an in between an autocross pad and a 10 lap race pad. So that has a much higher metallic content. There's Hawk, and then there's the two other big companies. My brain is just not here today. I've been definitely under the weather. Awesome, John. Glad you got the injectors. Let me see. There is two big. Let me just look up company names because I always forget the names. Project Moo is all over the places with pad types, so you would have to contact them. Hawk being the one you'd want to go to. They do offer a stock replacement. EBC, EBC pads. You're going to go with their least aggressive pad if you want something like that. So least aggressive Hawk replacement pad and the least aggressive EBC. The EBC use the color code red, green, and yellow. I believe, if I remember correctly, the green being the lightest composition, yellow being the next in the stage, and the red being the most aggressive as far as braking composition. So I just went with Duralast. I didn't want for shipping or be able to change them out for free. You know, it's funny you mentioned that because a lot of times something like that from AutoZone, you will have a decent brake dust, but I don't know if you lost braking capability. Paragon brakes. Yeah, so a lot of times when you get into the stuff like the WinMax, so I forget how much I paid, but that did WinMax W3s all the way around. I've had them on the car for about 10,000 miles. And as far as pads, expensive, they're kind of a middle. They're not horrible. They're like $160 for the fronts and around $100 for the rears. But if you look in there, this is a much more aggressive metallic compound. And so if you look at my rotors, you can see the chew marks that you get. You'll get like, I don't say grooves, like it starts to chew into the rotor before the pad wears out. So that's the disadvantage running a lot of metallic pad. And when you get into the crazy long distance pads, so let's say we're doing a 30 lap race, you're going to want something with a high carbon content. However, the drawback to that is you've got to get heat into the pads before you run them. So like WinMax, as you go up in numbers, the length of the pad, like the length of the race they're used for. So you got the W1 is a street pad, ceramic. The W2 is the semi-metallic. The W3 is more metallic and kind of like an autocross 10-lap track. And then you get into the W5s, and the W5s are high carbon content. They require them to get hot before they start working. They make a crap load of dust. However, the ability to stop from, I don't know, 150 miles per hour on a long back straight, you don't get brake fade. And I'll say I've had good success with these, but I can say that they still do have some brake fade. So, yeah, you're going to have grooves on the rotor if you have a more aggressive pad versus your rotor composition. Now, here's the funny thing. What rotors that you can buy, whether it's one piece or two piece, that doesn't necessarily dictate the hardness of the rotor. The problem is the carbon content in the steel can dictate how hard the rotor is. But if they go with too high of a carbon content in the steel, the rotor won't wear out, but then the car won't stop until it gets hot either. So has anybody here currently changed to the two-piece rotor, like the 2020s and the 2021s, just compared to their regular stock rotor? My question is, what have you had? What kind of success have you had if you've done that? Because I've heard a lot of people do that rather than spend $800 on a set of two-piece rotors. Hey, what's up, O'Neill? Timothy, I'm sorry I missed your message. The W, like I said, I've had experience with the WinMax. So let me say, I should say that I've had Hawks, EBCs, and WinMax. And as far as stopping, WinMax wins. As far as brake dust, Hawk wins. As far as middle of the road, EBC is there. Okay, so Juan, you say your rear pads went out before your fronts. That would indicate, let me see, did you change your front pads to a different brand, or are we talking stock to stock? Like, were you on stock fronts and stock rears and your rears went out first? I should mention this, and this may be the problem. I did kind of notice when my car was on stock pads front and stock pads in the rear, I'd get a lot of ABS activation if I was aggressive on the brakes. Whereas, and I believe this is because in the front, it's a Brembo package, but in the rear, it's the same brakes as the SI. It's not an upgrade. Well, it's not the same brakes as the SI, but it's not a Brembo brake in the front and a Brembo brake in the rear. First is stability control system. Yeah, but that's why I was asking if Juan does a lot of like racing, because the ABS active. Honestly, what I found, and this is just me, is when I went to the same brand front and rear, I found that when I hit the brakes, the ABS activation was drastically reduced, and the car wanted to put me through the window. I think that there's a pad difference in composition in front and back as far as stock to stock. I think just because because you got the Brembo package in the front, I think the back pads in the back are either a different material or insufficient. All stock. Were you racing the car at all, Juan, or just daily driving? Stock front, stock rears. I don't think there's enough braking from the front tires. Um, I'll say if you've lowered your car, that will add to the effect because you don't have the weight transfer to the front. So you're going to make the rears work harder. Yeah, see, the factory stuff, like I said, I understand composition, but the different brands and names, and that makes a lot of sense. Not lowered, and you still have the same problem. Well, that's good to know. I did know that they did do some reworking on the 2020s. So, I mean, there's sometimes these videos, yes, I can give some advice, but sometimes this is about us sharing. Because I've not run all sorts of brake. It's impossible for me to have run every type of brake pad setup. Roll racing and brake boosting. Interesting. That kind of makes sense though. Like I said, so when I put the WinMax, so here's what I'm going to suggest for everybody. I would say switch to a particular brand and keep that same brand compound front and rear. I've had fantastic success. Now that I've had the same compound and brand front and rear, they wear out at the same rate. I do brake boosting as well. But that's what I found. So my suggestion for everybody is if you're going to run, just keep them same front and rear. So, let's go over some of the brands. Upgrade rear pads. I know WinMax does it. Let me see. Project Moo, I'm pretty sure has rear pads. Let me see. Hawk has rear pads. I'm about positive that EBC has rear pads. So you've got WinMax, Project Moo, EBC, Stop Tech, and that's pretty much it. Now, okay, Acabino. Okay, yeah, that's another one. Tuning the PID. Wait, what is better, tuning PID traction or just reducing torque that the tires can handle in order to avoid crazy wheel spin? Which would make the car faster, basically? So if you're tuning the PID, well, the advantage to the PID is you can run a higher boost level on different surfaces. If you just reduce the torque, you're only reducing the torque for that surface, and then you have to retune. Tuning the PID with a limited amount of torque but more boost will be faster every time. So, for a weekend car, the thing is, you're always going to say, if you're willing to sacrifice the brake dust, um, like an EBC, when you say weekend car, are we talking autocross, drag racing, or like time attack or laps? So we need to kind of start there first. Between roll race versus normal tune. So we have to define the tune for your car's use. I will use an aggressive roll race tune if that's the only time you're aggressive on the car. Your roll race and drag race tune are pretty much the same thing. There's really no difference there, except for drag racing. We might have more power in first and second gear. If you're doing laps, the torque has to be less aggressive, and so does the boost to keep some of the heat down. Yeah. Well, like you said, Juan, just make sure you have the same compound and brand front and rear, and it's going to give you a better responsive. Now, your standard first two types of Hawk pad are not that aggressive. If you want something that's really going to be aggressive, you're going to have to go with a brand like Project Moo, WinMax, Acabeno, or EBC like yellow or red. But just match your compounds. That's going to definitely help a lot. When I do roll race tunes, I'll run them leaner and run them on a higher boost, higher torque. When I do like a track based tune for like 10 laps, something, excuse me, just bronchitis, something like that's going to do a lot of laps. I'm going to take 40, 50 foot-pounds of torque out of it, run some more fuel in it, because that motor is going to be under much more heat. Well, drag racing drag racing and cruising. Um, I don't know how fast you're getting or how often you're going to be hard on them. I wouldn't go with like a standard something from Dorlast. I would go. So, like I said, the company I'm so used to, and I'm sorry to kind of go back to this, is a WinMax W2. I would say, but no matter what, something that's going to be aggressive enough to stop you from higher speeds is going to make noise. If you're okay with that, then a W2. But if you don't want noise, you're not going to find a pad that's going to stop on a dime and not make noise. You've got to have something with some metallic compound in it. So I think that's probably the better advice I can give you. If you want something that's going to stop, it's got to either have metallic or some type of metallic and carbon. If you're just doing a ceramic only, you're just not going to have a better stopping capability for the most part. That's the big thing. And the noise comes from the metallic compound. Stop on a dime, but they make noise. I should have had a rotor in here. That's what I should have done. I should have brought a rotor in here so I could have gone over the vanes and stuff like that, and understanding how the rotor can draw air in and pull it through the rotor. And even if you didn't have the number, which direction it says on the rotor, which way to go, what about rotor suggestions other than OEM or aftermarket? Pretty much, if you're going to go to what's the best price for a brake set, that I can't answer you as far as best price for a brake set. I mean, I don't know if you mean brake pads or what, but as far as bargain hunting, that's the last thing. When I'm talking about stopping, I don't want to think about bargaining. What about rotor suggestions, OEM or aftermarket? So, because I'm only using my car for roll racing, or well, maybe some drag racing soon, honestly, I just used there's like a drilled and slotted version from Rock Auto. I think it's Stop Tech. I don't need a crazy aggressive rotor. Um, well, I don't mean that wrong way. Please don't take it every say bargain price like for cheaper sets. I don't concern myself with price, so please don't take that the wrong way. Um, so for like roll racing, I just have a standard one piece rotor. I don't need a two-piece rotor. I don't need to keep the heat out of the bearings because I'm not making that much heat in a roll race or drag race scenario. So front and rear Stop Tech single piece rotor. I think it's Stop Tech, vented and slotted. The only thing is the slotted rotors when you're driving past like like a wall or something, you hear the slots ticking. Um, you know, Freddie and myself got the parts from you all installed, ready to go. Can't wait for a dyno day. Appreciate the support. Yeah, buddy, got you guys covered. As tomorrow, I'm gonna start. After I get my orders out, I'm gonna start digging into more tunes. I just really got kind of hammered by the bronchitis. Could you add too much torque that would cause shifting issues? No, shifting issues. Are going to be in your fluid, the trans itself, or maybe the bushings on the trans or the bushings in the shifter. We try to mostly drag racing or cruising. Yeah, I discussed that. The single piece rotor is just all you need. You don't need a two-piece rotor. Okay, what's it? Brake setup, both front and rear. Are two-piece rotors lighter compared to a single-piece rotor? Yes. The other advantage to a two-piece rotor is the heat, is because the hat of the rotor is not the same material. And so the single-piece rotors are made from a casting. And the disadvantage is that when you have a casting like that, the graining isn't really quite there. So the grains of the material isn't as strong. Believe it or not, a two-piece rotor, as long as it's made right, is going to be stronger than a single piece rotor. The other thing is the heat dissipation from the two different materials. So they usually use different materials between the rotor hat and the actual rotor itself, and you can always change out the rotor. The big thing with those is to make sure that a lot of times when you have them, even when you replace the rotor itself, you often may have to take it and have it machined and cut so that it's perfectly aligned, so you don't have any sort of warpage. That's the kind of the good and bad with two-piece rotors. The advantage is unsprung weight. There's a couple of reasons for that besides the heat, the weight itself of the rotor. What they're trying to do in a race application is keeping the tire on the ground over bumps as much as possible. And any weight they can possibly remove from that area will help. And especially in the case when they want to upgrade the brake rotors to deal with longer races, every time you enlarge the rotor, you add weight. So going to a two-piece rotor can reduce the rate to kind of keep that sprung weight down. It's not so much about rotational weight, it's more about sprung weight. So the intercooler The last thing it's still working on is getting it time to get the crash bar. And unfortunately, I was supposed to be on the dyno, my car in the dyno on Monday, but I ended up double booking myself like a dummy, and so my car comes last. I just spilled some soda. Hold on. So when my car is not the priority, so I can have the intercooler made without the crash bar assembly if you're willing to cut your own crash bar to make the room and reuse your stock one. But they're not cheap. They are not cheap. It's going to be the most expensive intercooler on the market, but it's going to be the best made. And I'd prefer to try to do them in batches. Right now, the biggest thing is time. If anybody lives near here and they want some part-time work, come on over. I'll pay you. Because I seriously need help. Do our cars really need the cooling ducts? If you're going to take the car to tracks, yes. If you're just going to drive it and roll race here and there, you really don't need the cooling ducts. The cooling ducting is really for the racer, which is kind of like some of the oil coolers. I'm not a fan of. I forget which one, but one of them actually blocks off the brake ducting for the oil cooler, and I don't really like that because if you're going to block one side off, you might as well block the other side off. How much of an effect that has? Is it a huge amount? No, but it still has an effect. I think well, a lot of them actually sit down in that area. So you say probably the HKS. A lot of them sit down in that area, but not all of them block off the vent. Let me see. Uh, I actually believe it might be the Mishimoto. Mm. Man, I could use help. It's not even funny. I'm getting kind of tired of working from 9 a.m. to 9 o'clock at night. It's getting old. It's getting old, man. I don't have any time to enjoy. Yeah, I think it's the Mishimoto here. Pretty sure. Yeah, it looks like it because I think they actually make the duct force it through the oil cooler, which does help. Oh. How do you know? Hold on. How do you know if an injector seals are leaking? Um, there's two sets of seals that can leak. There's the fuel side where um, it'll just leak fuel, and then there's the other side, the combustion side, that you will start to hear. It sounds like an exhaust leak from underneath the intake manifold, and the car will start to misfire shortly thereafter. Set trap 25 row and mounted in the center upper front bumper on my Accord. No ill effects on coolant temp, but definitely huge improvement on oil temp. Absolutely. So here's the thing. Um, Oil cools the engine too. That's something that a lot of people, when you move the oil cooler up there in front, you're going to get cooler oil, and the oil itself has a big effect of cooling the engine because the oil travels through a lot of the engine just like the coolant does. Now, you don't have as much oil as you do coolant, but by putting an oil cooler up front, you are not going to have a negative effect because the effect of cooling the oil is going to be just as much, if not more, than that little bit of space that you're maybe blocking off some air to the radiator. There is no ill effect to put an oil cooler up there front and center, which is exactly why I have it there. And I actually wanted to mention this. And as much as I love Mishimoto for an intercooler, I don't like them for a radiator. um, for those guys who may be doing track. Uh, right now, I've run stock, Mishimoto, and Koyo, and I actually went back to the Koyo because when I have put in my sleeve block, excuse me, it was running around and the low speed fan was on constantly. Once the motor got hot, it would be at 195 no matter what, and the low speed fan is sometimes even hotter, even with the oil cooler in the front. So I went back to my coil radiator because I knew that I had better success with that. And I thought, even though Mishimoto is a heavier radiator and it's got more rows in it, it's not as thick front to back and it doesn't hold as much coolant. And I literally do not see, so before I'd see 195 to like 200 all day long, constantly. No matter what I did, it just would never go down. Now I'm lucky if I see 190, and I'm lucky if the low speed fan turns on at all. It literally, as soon as the fan turns on, the temperature right back down. Now the only disadvantage is if you're running a Mishimoto intercooler, the on the radiator where the fan sits is a square tab. You have to round the edge, and on the other side where the end of the radiator is made, it has a C, not a U, they call it a C bracket or whatever. It touches the charge pipe. So, not charge pipe, the charge pipe coupler. You just have to grind down about, maybe about this tall, about half an inch off, fits right in there. And I had a very good improvement in coolant temperatures. So, for those of you maybe running track and don't have a huge amount of money, because I've heard people run about the CWR radiators, Koyo is a very good, inexpensive option. Um, the other trick I'll tell you guys is taking the radiator and putting a spacer on the original tab and tilting the radiator forward. That actually helps get some a distance between the radiator and the actual downpipe for those who are running a catted downpipe. So you can go into the radiator and the bolts that hold the tabs, the radiator in, get longer bolts and put some spacers in there and tilt that radiator away from the heat. What brake fluid do I use? I just use a basic .4. I actually even threw .3 in there because I ran out because I'm not tracking the car. The difference between .3 and .4 is the synthetic. It just the .4 is a higher temperature rated synthetic. I think it's what is it 5.1 or something? That's either, God, I gotta remember the .5.1. You gotta watch doesn't mix. So as long as the brake fluid is an acceptable mix, but does 5 do not mix 5.1? I think it is. Brake fluid. Yeah. So do not mix .5.1 with .5. Or is it just .5? You gotta watch because the dot threes and fours is fine. 3 and 4 are fine. There it is. 5.1 is compatible with 3 and 4. 5 is not. Got it. Awesome. Thank you. Because sometimes, so yeah, your standard dot 4 is going to be enough for most people. Now, if you're going to switch to a 5, you're going to have to drain everything out of the system like 3 times. If you put a 5.5 in there and you've got something else in there, you just start swelling seals up. It doesn't, you lose the brake pedal. It becomes a total disaster. So you just got to be careful with the seals that you run. Even, I should say, even some of the dot threes you can get like a dot 3, it's considered dot 3 synthetic, and they'll still have a really good temperature. So as long as you're not really buying some really cheapo brand, and you're not, racing, doing laps and time attack, you're not going to have any problems. Best mod path for street driving. That's a very general question. I would really kind of need you to be more specific as far as what are you looking at? Power, stopping, turning? I mean, as far as suspension goes, I'm not a suspension master. But the first thing, power, well, you need to kind of be specific as for what you're using the car for. You're saying for power, but what? Roll racing? Drag racing? How often should brake fluid be changed? The standard for normal driving is 3 years, 30,000 miles. However, just because the brake fluid doesn't look dirty doesn't mean it's bad. Brake fluid absorbs moisture. It's not hydrophobic. Oh God, my brain is like mush tonight. Brake fluid absorbs moisture, and so if you open up and you look in your brake fluid, and although it may not be discolored, it doesn't look very clear. That's generally an indication that it's got a lot of water in it. It does absorb a lot of moisture, and that's the idea, is you don't want moisture in your brake fluid. So I generally say 2 years, 30,000 miles. So that's where I'm. If you are like a weekend warrior guy, I would do it at least once a year or twice a year. If you're doing like autocross, and it just depends on the amount of heat you put in it too. Because when you get the brake fluid hot, thank you. God, I can't think of the words tonight. Hygroscopic, not hydrophobic, hygroscopic. Thank you. Oh, sorry, man. Sorry, guys, man. I'm really kind of under the weather. Go into detail about PID and how it allows you to add traction. Well, let's go back real quick to the power. The best thing you can do to a car is a tune and better fuel choices. But your bolt-ons, intake, intercooler, downpipe, tune, and ethanol. PID, how it adds to the traction. You can reduce ignition timing. You control the rate at which ignition timing is reduced. So in the PID scenario, I can change how fast the ECU reacts to a certain amount of slip rate. And I can change when that ignition timing is pulled, and I can change the rate at which that ignition timing is pulled. And what it does is it keeps the tires within a certain slip rate. Once you get beyond a certain slip rate, the car goes nowhere. So if you keep it within a certain slip rate, you'll have enough traction that the car will be faster than you could ever do. Generally, I've found that it's even faster than when you try to reduce torque. So basically, let's just give an example. Let's say I had a car and I wanted it to be no more than 10% slip rate. I could start reducing at 4 or 5%. And then in between, maybe I want maybe this car takes 3 degrees of ignition timing at 5% slip rate because it doesn't have a lot of power. Or if it does have a lot of power, to keep it down to a 5% slip rate, it might take 18 degrees of ignition timing. I can change that curve and rate at which it comes back. Now, PID is a constant of control. I don't know where you classify as closed loop, open loop for PID. Because closed loop, open loop, I've only understood it as the way I've been taught, as in the difference between. I mean, maybe that makes more sense because of the closed loop, open loop, but closed loop, open loop is ignore a sensor or read from a sensor. That's where I've understood closed loop, open loop as like an oxygen sensor, a closed loop. Right. Agree. Looks at a feedback. Right. But the PID, so the regular Honda traction, okay, so let's look at it this way. The regular Honda traction errors out and ignores. But it functions within a certain range. So I would kind of put the PID in where it doesn't ignore it ever. So it will, in a PID scenario, let's just say it has a drawback. Say you're in snow. There's the perfect example. It's going to constantly try to pull ignition timing, and it will never error out. It will always do it, no matter what. It's a constant state. Whereas the Honda traction control can error out, and it can ignore it. If you've got enough rate of increase in wheel speed slip, it will completely ignore the Honda traction original settings. When you go back and you tune the PID, it's a constant. And you can make sure that when you turn on the PID, that no matter what, when it sees that slip rate, it's going to pull ignition timing. So that would be the best way to look at it. So yeah, agreed. Open loop, closed loop will ignore a particular part or sensor of the car. But I'm not sure what the car looks at to see an error rate other than the rate of slip rate increase. Yeah, I do have Motec. However, guys, I've been so effing busy. I have not even had the chance to go to Best Buy and get a USB adapter to go USB to Ethernet because Motec uses Ethernet. I'll show you guys. I have not even had a chance to do anything other than open this and look at it. That's how it's been. So, Motec traction control is a little bit more advanced. However, you're looking at similar principles. So, this is your lambda adapter. Might as well show you guys. So this is your lambda adapter. And what this does is it converts the Bosch LSU into a signal that the Motec can read. Because it doesn't read it in the standard rate signal. Kind of like having a flex fuel sensor. So this is the Motec M142 ECU itself. So this is basically, you can buy this independent. I believe they're around $4,000 just for the M142. So the question is, what do you pay? What do you pay all that extra for? Well, this is where, and here's the software. You get a little USB drive and the extra. So here is the extra module that converts. So you have your inputs to convert into the M142 from your standard. And this has got a lot to do with the direct injection. That's part of it. You have a lot of your harness adapters. that you will need to connect it to. Then you have, here is another piece of the adapter. This is for your O2, your wideband, and that's your wide connect to your other wideband adapter. Then this is your Ethernet. So this uses an Ethernet input so that the data rate can be as high as possible. This is way faster than USB or an OBD2 plug-in. That's why, I have not had a chance because neither of my laptops actually have an Ethernet input. They only have USB and USB-C. I'm not buying another laptop just so I can run Motec. So I'm going to buy an adapter. Now, yes, this will reduce the data rate, but guys, I'm not running an F1 Indy car. I'm running a Civic Type R. I don't need that kind of data rate. But just so you guys know, the data rate on this is just absolutely outrageous. And for those of you, Motec has amazing tuning capability. And the biggest thing is for the Motec is there's so many settings. However, it's more about finding the settings you need. That's why I have it, and I haven't had a chance to delve into it as much as I like. And it's about finding the settings where they are, because there's thousands. But how many do you need? 50 or so tables and settings you need to get into, and you just need to find where they are. That's the big thing. And my goals for switching to Motec, the big thing is really I want to get rid of the standard electronic gate. I either want to go to a 4-port solenoid with like an upgraded canister style gate, or even just an external gate. How long will it take to install? It's probably like 40 minutes. It's not hard to install. They give you pretty simple instructions. It's just a matter of tucking the wires in there. It goes where the original one is. The thing is, there's no hardware in there. So I got to figure out what bolts will thread in. So when choosing from stock exhaust to 3-inch pipe exhaust, how much power difference we're looking at for a full bolt-on stock turbo Fk8 on E50? I honestly, here's the thing. I don't even know if that will gain much because I've made over 500 horsepower on a stock catback exhaust. Now, I'm not saying stock front pipe, stock down pipe, but I can tell you that right around high 600s, 700s is what a full 3-inch exhaust will do. I can't answer you how much power you will gain on a full 3-inch exhaust with a stock turbo. And on E50, you're going to definitely have to be on a fuel system, a full fuel system. No one component will give you enough for E50 on a stock turbo Type R. You may be able to get away with the stock in-tank pump, but you're going to need a high-pressure pump, high-pressure line, and injectors. Oh, man. You're going to need more than just an XDI pump to run E50. Clutch, I'd probably say that there's a good chance the bearings are going out. They don't hold up. The P600s don't really hold up well. Now, on a Garrett, you may hear that, you may hear some of the spool down, and I have found that to be normal from turbo to turbo. You'll hear it because the bearings have a lot of clearance. They're a little bit loose. As far as for a low pressure pump for the standard stock turbo, I'd run a DW300C. Can I do an install video for the Motec? There's instructions. Guys, there's instructions that come with the Motec. I'll yeah, you know. Oh, that's right. You asked, is a retune needed for the new Honda to update? You shouldn't. Just if the car is tuned, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's literally instructions on how to install it. Yep. I mean, hey, why not? I mean, you pay. What's funny is you pay almost $7,000, but they can't give you an Ethernet cable. I don't know, man. To me, that's kind of like, huh? I don't know. What do I know? I'm not a full on. Here's the thing I want to say about Motec. It is a fantastic tool, and the thing is, though, this is full on motorsports, and to be honest with you, I wish they kind of made something in between. I wish there was like a Honda S300 for the car, something like that, something along those lines. However, that's probably not going to happen because the direct injection. But I'll say though, there's things that are a lot easier to do in Motec. So, for high pressure pump control, it's literally as easy as adding percentage to the pump value, adding injectors, adding percentage to the injector value. It's literally that simple. The A lot of the stuff with the Motec is your car can be running and boom, put it done. There's no 5 minute wait. Um, I understand the basics of the fuel control. There is a Q called the Q function. It is literally as you are going, the Q function is kind of like an auto tune function for the fuel. So it's more about learning what. Okay, it's kind of like you're learning your way around the software more than it is for the tuning. And once you learn your way around the software, it's like any other thing. Once you know where the stuff is, man, boom, 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 done. But no, I just can't wait till I actually get a chance to really dig into that, man. You do all sorts of things, man. It's just crazy. Now, how much do you want the wastegate to close? How fast do you want the wastegate to close? I'm wondering if maybe I'll stick with the E gate because I have the Motec and I can turn around and change the PID function of the wastegate. Or even if it doesn't have PID, maybe it's the similar charts to PID where I can change the rate at which the wastegate opens or closes. I know I can run whatever wastegate I want. So it's just a matter of time, getting a little bit of time with the software. So funny thing is, albeit I've had the software way before I had the Motec, I just never had I played with it a little bit, and I know how to add port injection into the software. Um, there is a boost limit in there from when you first buy them that prevents you from sending it to the moon as soon as you hook it up. Did I put Motec on this one? No, well, yeah, there it is. Motec M1 tune. I don't know which firmware that is, but um, yeah, allow access. Anyway, is a retune needed for the new Honda update? No, you just don't. You don't need to do it. Ported head tier 2 cams versus non-ported head with tier 2 cams. Here's what I'm gonna say about which, if you want more power, which is going to give you more power per pound of boost, ported head or cams. Rarely is it porting the head, but in this case, these cars make about, on this dyno here, 31 pounds, make 510 on this one dyno over here. And on the ported head, I'll tell you right out the gate, my base map was 22 pounds, and I made the same damn horsepower porting the head. Now, that was with the way I ported the head. So, however, with the tier 2 cams, you can put the cams in without pulling the head off, but you can't rev as high. So you have your advantages and disadvantages, but understand that a ported head's going to make the same power in about 7 to 8 pounds less boost. Cams are TR2 cams are going to make the same power on about 5 to 6 pounds, about 5 pounds less boost. I think it is 5 pounds less boost. The 2000cc injectors idle just fine. You might get a 30 RPM fluctuation. For those who complain about a 30 RPM fluctuation, you're asking a lot of a stock ECU on 2000cc injectors. It's when you get into TR2 cams, ported head, and 2000cc injectors. Now we get some things where the idle kind of surges a little. It's not rough. It's not like or anything like that. It's a straight idle. Just sometimes just a little bit, not like 1400 RPM. We're talking. So TR2 cams, I naturally have to bring the idle up, and that's for vacuum on the manifold. Whenever you go to a bigger cam, the vacuum is reduced due to the height of the lift of the cam and the duration. Whenever you have a smaller lift cam, you have better vacuum in the manifold, you have better idle characteristics. Cams have more of an effect on idle characteristics. So PRL, P700, RV6, R660. R660 all the way. So unfortunately, I don't have an update on the speed source because when I was on the dyno, I was going to use the speed source. When I was at the dyno, I was tuning the R710, and I was tuning, and I realized I had double booked, and I had another customer at E-Tune. So my car was put on the back burner, and I did not tune my car. I was supposed to tune my car Monday and see what happened on the dyno. So I don't have an update on the speed source. I can tell you that the R710 is a big compressor wheel, and you can use it on a stock motor, but I think it will be better for those with cams. Is there an upgrade for ignition coils? Yes, there is. However, don't waste your money. It's not worth it. There's MSD coils, and I don't call them an upgrade. They're just kind of a swap over. And honestly, I have the Ignition Projects coils, and I'm going to sell them because I didn't have any benefit for them. I didn't have any benefit. So they're not for me. Maybe for somebody else. I don't know. Maybe it's because I run the ruthenium plugs, and the ruthenium plugs have better conductivity, so you don't need it. I can't answer you on that. But I've thrown both in, and zero difference. Literally zero difference, guys. I had no difference whatsoever. I mean, stock coils, man, they pump out 30,000 volts. I mean, that's a lot. I should say this. This is a perfect example. The same spark plug gap, stock gap versus the standard coils, they will start to break up and have problems at the same power levels. So that tells me that the Ignition Projects coils are just not going to make any large benefit. So as far as the stock coil pack being better, what I should mention is there's enough voltage in the stock coil pack that I haven't found a limit to it yet. So I can't answer you. So when you have enough spark in the first place, upgrading a coil pack is just not going to show a difference. I have avian mythkin. I want to replace the nozzle to Snow Performance nozzle, but not sure which one's equivalent to 500cc. 8. I think it's 8 GPH. If I want to change, stay OEM and grab FL5 coil packs. I didn't even know if the FL5 coil packs were any different, honestly, and I wouldn't go worrying about it because I wouldn't sit there and say that the FL5 coil packs are better unless they're proven. And I wanted to mention something else too. I looked at the tune for the FL5 versus the Type R. And I kind of wonder, and I'm going to tell you guys, I wonder if the FL5 have different camshafts or there's something different in the cylinder head. The reason I'm saying this is because as far as cam timing and ignition timing, the two tunes for the base maps that Honda came up with for the Fk8 versus the FL5 are radically different. Ignition timing curves are different, and the stock ignition timing curve is different, and the stock cam timing curve is different. So I do kind of wonder if the FL5 has something different in the cylinder head. I wonder if it has different cams or maybe something different in the cylinder head itself. So, except for we don't know yet. That's kind of wonder. And I do know that looking at the software, for those of you who wanted to go to an FL5, the injector size number is identical, which tells me that they run the same injector. So my injectors will be FL5 compatible. Being that Honda already has an injector size in there, that means here, let me go into there. Oh, wow. They've already got yet another update. Check that out. So let's see what they added in this new update. They are cranking out the updates lately. And I did have a conversation with Doug not too long ago. And I believe they hired another software guy, which is where we're seeing a lot of these updates cranking out, which I think are awesome. I think Honda is really starting to kind of take things to the next level. What will MHI Stage 2? I would recommend you have to make sure the oil's API SN certified and either 10W40 or 5W40, depending on your environment. Colder environment, 5W40. If it's like a winter type environment, below 50 degrees constantly, run a 5W30. But running 0W20 is not something I'd recommend on an MHI Stage 2. A lot of people do not understand the load on the turbine and compressor are higher due to the amount of air. Larger air, larger compressor wheel, larger turbine wheel, larger load on the bearings and the bushings. They use bushings in that case. They don't use like a ball bearing. They have a bearing, but it's not a true ball. It's not a ball bearing. And for those of you who want to get plugs on your own, 20 thousandths is a good in between. Yeah, I agree. Even on stock turbo, if you're going to push the turbo harder, man, go to 5W30. I mean, you're dealing with higher pressures on the turbo, and the stock turbo does I don't know, I think it was like 17 pounds on a stock tune. Greetings from Spain. Well, thank you very much for tuning in from such a distance. So, street math plus Honda math versus race math for R660. So, what I have found is that when you're getting into a larger turbo, having a larger inlet in the very beginning is always going to be advantageous. So for me, I would go to a race MAF housing and use a standard MAF sensor. The tuning is simpler, and I believe always. So here's my philosophy, and I've stuck by this, and it has done me well. Is the inlet side of the turbo, any restrictions there are bigger than a restriction post where it's pressurized. So if like a stock inlet on a big turbo is going to make power later because you can't pull the air in until you're really driving that turbo harder. So if you want better spool turbo response, make power earlier, you want that inlet to be as big as possible. What's your thoughts on high zinc oil and CATs? Myth is that it kills the catalytic converter. So Yes, in a very high zinc content, it will kill a catalytic converter over time. And you're talking a lot of time because in order to kill the converter, you have to have blow by. So if the car has extremely low blow by, you're not going to burn the zinc. So you have to put things in perspective. It's not a myth that it'll kill a converter. It will, but you've got to burn enough of it to kill it. It's like lead. Leaded fuels will kill a catalytic converter and will actually, over time, destroy an oxygen sensor. But you have to look at the amounts. So that's why, yes, high zinc can damage a catalytic converter over time. So according to this, FL2, FL5, Fk8 added pressure drop tables for air filter and intercooler. What? What are we talking about here? Pressure drop tables for what? No way. Okay, I need to see what the heck they're talking about here. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Okay. When they say pressure drop, let's see what they're talking about. What they pressure drop tables. What are they? Where? Where did they put these tables? Sensors. What are they talking about here? Oh, okay. Ah, I see. I see. I see. I see. I see. Okay. That is an interesting concept. So what they've done here is they have an estimated or calculated pressure drop table. So basically, however, because you don't have interesting, this should have an effect on air charge. Calculated pressure drop across the intercooler. So basically, what this is a table that's estimating pre and post intercooler. Let's say you're pulling out 35 pounds of boost at there. We don't know unless you have a problem. Is if you don't have a sensor to actually measure this, you won't know how much pressure change you have before and after intercooler. So it's quite interesting that the tables are there, and I'm curious to see. A better intercooler has a less pressure drop. So I'm very curious to see. And the other thing is, they don't do it in boost pressure; they're doing it in mass rate flow. So, well, no, okay, no, there it is. They're estimating that however many the mass airflow has to be. Looks like the mass airflow has to be connected to calculate that. So. What that chart's going to do for those of us that have changed an intercooler is give us a more consistent air charge. So that's what that's going to do. But however, I'm not sure that we really kind of need those tables too much, but it's a good, interesting table to put in there. I think there could be some uses for that. Sorry about that. I got distracted. What is your thought on how upgrade path for power daily roll race canyon driving? So I don't know how far you want to take it, but my first thing is I'm going to tell you is your standard bolt-ons, PRL race math. Get either the Mishimoto or the PRL inlet. Catted or catless downpipes, up to you. I'd say innovate, take catless downpipe. You might not be able to find a downpipe depending on where you're at, because they might not be sold. Full exhaust, obviously a tune, fuel system, run 50% ethanol, and it depends on your altitude for your canyon drive. If you're going over, 2,500 feet, I'd say definitely switch to a bigger MHI Stage 2 or an RV6 R660. That's where I go. Would it be better to mount the air filter on a G30 turbo instead of running the inlet pipe with the no MAF tune? So for a daily driver scenario, leave the whole thing on. And as I've told many people before with a PRL intake, take that side cover off and cut a 3-inch hole. That air by that ECU is cold. So, would it be better? Yeah. So I would leave the whole assembly on. The only time you really, so until you start getting into like the 650, 700 horsepower territory, that's the time you might, in like a drag race scenario, you might have a little bit better success having no inlet at all. How hard was it to put a hood exit on my car? It was really easy. I paid the guy behind me to do it over at Reggie Built. So you have to ask him. I paid him to do it. With no math, can I swap the intake to whatever I want? Yes, you can. However, it may change. If you change the intake that's less efficient, you may notice a little less power in spool. Stockhead Tier 2 for RV6 power potential. Can the 1430s upgrade for the 6AN and Hellcat pump setup? The R-Life, the question of Tier 2 cams. The 1430s are going to kind of cap out around 550 either way. The advantage would be is if you want to run like 93 octane instead, you can get into the 500s on 93 octane with that setup. If you want more than 550 on an R660 on that kind of setup, you're going to need to go to 2000 cc's. Even if you run the 6AN lines, the biggest restriction is on my injectors, the indirect injectors in general, the ability to keep adding fuel as RPM increases because your injection window gets so small. What's your 60 to 130 or 100 to 200? Well, I haven't done a 60 to 130 in a long time since I had stock trans and the G30, and I believe I had the 83 housing. And it's on my video. If you go to my YouTube, it says 60 to 130, not full send. I'll let you add the math there. It may not be on a draggy, but it's in the sevens. I went from screen to screen and in 7 seconds. So, and I blew the tires off in third. But the problem is now the way the car is, I can't start in third. I'd have to start in second and shift twice. So I'm probably slower now from 60 to 130 than I was before. So instead of even tray carbon inlet instead of PRL titanium inlet, PRL intake, what do you think? I think go to a Mishimoto inlet and just connect it to a PRL intake. That's going to be your best bet. The Mishimoto inlet's the best one out there right now. Mishimoto catch can, Mishimoto oil cooler, depth leak gauges, good setup. I'm not sure, Sham Fk8. I'm not sure. Well, you're asking me for good setup for what? For just keeping oil temperatures down? Here's the thing. Anytime you add an oil cooler, the cooler is restrictive and you lose pressure. And the problem is when you lose pressure, obviously you lose flow. I run my oil cooler very different. I have a custom setup where the oil goes through the oil cooler and then it goes to an oil turbo pressure regulator afterwards. So the oil cooler gets fed only there. If you put in an oil cooler in a sandwich plate, you have to push the oil through the oil cooler, and you always drop oil pressure and have to run a heavier oil. So it's a catch-22. 34 PS. Wait, why were you throwing? Okay, so let me say something about these boost numbers. Boost number is a restriction. We need to look at boost number and restriction because my car on like 24 PSI makes 600 wheel horsepower. So, and the R-Life 34 PSI, R660, 2000 cc's, TR2 cams, 600, 620s. You would need valve train as an absolute must. Now, I don't know about 620, but I don't see a reason it can't hit 600 on R660. and I'm not sure about the boost level that it would take to get there. So I could tell you this, on a G3770, 31 psi, made 620 on that same setup, revving to 8 grand. And you rev to where the car is happy when it comes down to big horsepower. You've got to find out where the car wants to make power. Now, what I can do, yes, cams push power later, but we can change the cam timing. So your cam timing can push the power later or earlier. So that's what a really good tuner does. A really good tuner understands that even though we have the same camshafts, we can change the cam timing some to kind of push the power around, make it lower, make it higher, make the turbo spool better. And this is the biggest thing that I can't stand, that and what people say, oh, once cam timing is set for spool, that's the right cam timing. That is so dead wrong. It's stupid. It's absolutely stupid, because you can make, if I turn around and I use the same cam timing on every damn car, there'd be so many cars that wouldn't spool well. So sorry, off topic, just something that annoys the hell out of me. And when you have variable cam timing and you have two different turbo sizes on two different setups, you don't use the exact same cam timing. What is the importance of having an oil catch can? The thing with the oil catch can, there's two things for the oil catch can. Now, on a stock motor, it's generally about keeping carbon buildup off the valves because you're burning the oil. That's the importance of having an oil catch can. So as far as when you get into really big horsepower methanol, ethanol cars, you get a lot more blow by due to the cylinder pressure. It's not ring gap, it's cylinder pressure. When you have a lot more cylinder pressure, the idea is to keep the oil vapors out of being pulled into the intake and burning them and reducing your octane. What point, when does the stock Fk8 transmission start having problems with horsepower and or torque? I keep them around 430 foot-pounds of torque, and they seem to live a very long life. The big thing is how you shift. Do you have an upgraded clutch? Do you drive it onto like circuit courses? One of the things that breaks transmissions is the guys that are on the circuits, they hit the curves, the car comes up and drops back down, the wheel spinning, and then wham, that has a tendency to break a transmission first. Now, I did make 500 foot-pounds of torque on my stock transmission. However, I didn't drive it around at that level. I drove it around at about 450. Then they do just let go. I actually broke third gear, not fourth gear. Well, thank you, Sham. I really appreciate that, man. That's an awesome compliment. I'm not so worried about subscribers. And the big thing is I'm worried about the business and giving out to the community. Are you watching, Devin? Okay, so I know you're talking about Devin's AKD performance, and I'm actually talking to him. And we're having conversations because there's only a couple cars out there that really have the potential to make use of the all-wheel drive system. So ironically enough, it's kind of funny that for some reason I happen to have welds on all four wheels, but there's a lot to go when it comes down to the all-wheel drive setups. And he's talking about wanting to enter for SEMA this year. I have to make a visit down there, but I absolutely have to get caught up on my customers' orders first. If for some reason, and I believe we're talking about the same person, Virginia, and if it works something out, I'll leave my car with them. I mean, what more can I say? You know, and no promises on that. We're just having conversations. You know, I don't throw things out there. I'm not going to say I'm not buying a gigantic G45 turbo and claiming 1,000 horsepower. Just trying to keep it real. No offense to the guys who like Fuzzy, but he's just kind of going crazy with the posts. Is anti-lift worth it at my power level? Will it reduce the risk of breaking the transmission? Actually, it'll do quite the opposite. Anti-lift actually creates more traction. Anti-lift changes the leverage on which the spring rate is affected. So what'll happen is, depending on the position, I know it's not necessarily caster, but it depending, yeah, the compliance mounts help with traction, but the more traction you have, the harder it is on the transmission. The anti-lift, what it does is it's going to uh, basically make it so that when the car, like whenever you have a weight transition, that leverage against the springs is greater, so the nose comes down faster, but also so that when the car wants to lift, it does not have the ability to. It's hard to explain how it works. It doesn't actually change the spring rate. Suspension can be so complicated. And to be honest with you guys, there are some parts of suspension, even though I've been alignment, steering, and suspension, I've done that for a lot of part of my life. There are still some things I don't understand about exactly how it works. All I can tell you is kind of like seesaw leverage. You have more leverage on the dive and it will lift less. Yes, I know what you're talking about, but the guy's name on the IG is he's the guy that's doing it, that has the transmission case, is AKD Performance. So anti-lift can help with wheel hop and spin. So I know it. Yes, it does change caster, but there's a little bit more to it. It has some type of leverage effect. So what, 400 CPSI? Oh, cat. Okay, yeah. The cat counts per inch. Does it generate a lot of back pressure? Well, the big cat. So the thing is, the higher count per inch is more back pressure. What I can tell you from what I've seen is right around 6,000 RPM. There, on stock turbo, I start to see the wideband temp air fuel change. And what that means, even though the command is the same, you'll see this on catted cars. It looks like it leans out up top, and it doesn't. And what happens is it's the cat starting to heat up and burn more gases, burn off more of that unburnt fuel. So I'm going to say, regardless of what is set out there, around above 400 horsepower, it starts becoming some type of restriction, regardless. So, but as far as compared to some of the other standard ones, the smaller catted ones often use 200 count per inch. So there's less. So it's really hard to make a comparison. But I'll say the car that I made 430 on stock fuel system had one of those on it. So let's keep in mind, though, that's a very large catalytic converter for a stock fuel system, stock turbo car. So, yeah. So if I were to explain caster, that's actually quite interesting. Um, Believe it or not, caster doesn't cause a car to pull; it actually pushes. So you have this leverage, and the wheel is here. Okay, and the more you change the caster, the more the leverage wants to turn in. So, like if the wheel's straight up and down like this, okay, the wheel's not going to want to turn forward or backward. So, picture this as your wheel out here. So, if we take the add some caster, what this does is on this leverage on the wheel out here, it wants to not only push up, but it wants to push forward. So, when you have a car with a lot of caster, all right, it wants to stay straight. It doesn't want to come out of steering left or right. It naturally wants to come back to a center position. So by adding more caster, you do change the bump steer. So that can change the bump steer a little bit, because when you go over a bump, you're changing that attitude of the car. But you are also changing the leverage when you slam the brakes. There's a little bit more to it than that. And that's why I say, where we get into suspension, that's a little bit over my head. when it comes down to those. Suspension is an art in itself, like engine building. So, I did mention, so Danny, so and as far as the wheel position, it's not that drastic as far as what we can see. We're only talking a couple degrees, which is very minimal. It would be like you wouldn't be able to physically see the difference in the change. The other thing it does is the way the suspension arm compresses against the spring is changed. So that's got a lot to do with it. So because you can not only move the change the caster, you can move the control arm any which way. When you start playing with those angles, there's a lot that goes on. Any words on the RV6 710? So we have one on Logan's car, and unfortunately, we forgot the wheel locks to put stalkers back on. However, just to give an idea, if you put R888s, a big fat R888 tire on a dyno, and you strap it down hard, you're going to lose about 20 or 30 horsepower on your readings because a big fat tire is sticky. And if you put a slick on the dyno, be prepared to have 50 to 60 horsepower lower on your numbers. However, we made 525 horsepower to where I was comfortable pushing the turbo. The thing is, the compressor wheel is very large at this point, and I'd say for those who are going in R710, it's definitely a car I suggest you should have cams to be able to make a bigger boost on it. You need that exhaust volume to drive that turbo harder too. Now, I did get it to spool around 4,500. However, that did take some work, but it did spool around there. Let me see. See if I can kind of get this graph. Now, because we were taking a reading off of the ignition coil, it got this, the reading comes in and out. But as we can see, the graph looks like a ski slope. And the thing is, we haven't fully got into the prime efficiency range of the turbo at that size. So, again, depending on the dyno that you're on and the tires that you're on, how it's strapped down, at least 545, and that's a stock motor. His motor's bone stock. So let's keep that in mind. But I think that's a great turn. If you're looking to go bigger power down the road, like 650, I think that's perfect. So like the G30 770 does the same thing with enough fuel, just looks like a ski slope. So with that bigger 81 housing, it's just hard to drive a compressor wheel for big PSI numbers. Again, keep that in mind. So basically the car essentially made 545 on a 545. It was like 30.5 pounds. So it wasn't a crap load of boost either. So it's make good money. So I'm going to be straight honest. Every time a full turbo kit will outperform a drop-in. And so because the 3770 has the bigger turbine wheel. But the thing is, in order to do that in a drop-in turbo, you have to completely redesign a bunch of stuff. So it's not worth the amount. No update on the anti-surge yet. That's going to be a little bit, a couple months. So just hang tight. I really think for those of you on stock motor, I think when RV6 comes out with that anti-surge, R660 is going to be like the champ. Like there's nothing is going to come close. Honestly, I think it's probably going to make G Series G25 660 kits sales go down. But if you guys are looking to make, 675 to 700 wheel horsepower, you need to go to a true G3770 or well, I don't know, maybe. It's hard to say. We got to have the right car. We have to find a car that can actually make use of that turbo. That's the whole thing. Like a G3900, it does the same thing. You will actually make more power on a G3770 on a stock motor than you will on a G3900 on a stock motor because you're in the compressor efficiency range. Would we need a retune once that's on? Actually, yes. You will need a retune once it's on because you're going to increase the efficiency of the compressor a lot. You absolutely need a retune because the torque's going to go way up, and so is the compressor efficiency. So stock cam, stock valve train, upgraded high pressure fuel pump. What's the max reliable RPM for track use? I don't know what injectors you have, but your injectors are going to be your limit if you're running stock injectors. What happens when a turbo surges? So depending on how it's surging, it depends on what it does. Usually it just makes noise. So when you hit a surge line, you can either hear like on spool up a howl, or you can hear like a chuffing, like a the chuffing is more harmful than a resonant noise. It can put some wear on the turbo, but I mean, you have to be super aggressive. You know, Honda injectors, okay, it depends on the fuel you're running, but I rev out stock valve train depending on the turbo to like on a track use application, I wouldn't go past 7,400. Just pounding on the car like that, I wouldn't go past 7,400. It's all in the tune and the turbo and what turbo you're running and where the efficiency range is of the turbo. I mean, that's really all got to do with that. Well, listen, guys, time's up. I got to call it a night. I've got way too much to do tomorrow. 78. Well, yeah. Well, yes. Yeah. Well, we're doing, well, yeah, your car a little different with the RV6 and the you have two different tunes too. So, wait, is it that the turbine spins in reverse? No, that's not what happens. The turbo doesn't change directions. That's not what happens with surge. What happens is the air wants to come back out the compressor housing. So the air does this. It doesn't spin in reverse. Is a G3770 rev to 8K okay? Well, if you have the valve train, yeah. And guys, where you rev a turbo to depends on the efficiency of the motor. If you had a little 1.6 liter, you can rev a G25 660 to 9,000. Where you rev the turbo to depends on the setup. If I tried to rev a G3770 to 8,300 on my car, I'd probably blow that thing up like nobody's tomorrow. It's just not a big enough compressor to keep up. I would just overspin the snot out of the turbo. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate everybody stopping by, and maybe I'll get subscribers more soon, but people like different types. I do this chat for everybody so they can kind of get to the right direction of where they want to go. I'll see y'all next week, and want to pick a topic, just send me on Instagram, man. Wait, think about going at speed and throwing the car in reverse. What happens? Boom, boom, boom. No, that's not what happened. You guys are nuts, man. All right, have a good night, everybody. Yes, Wes, I'm setting everybody tomorrow orders and tune setups. All right, everybody. See y'all later.